Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Iman. I'll be the moderator today. We have a panel today that's pretty similar to what we did yesterday in terms of structure. So there's no prepared talks, but we're going to have, inshallah, a good conversation today amongst four great scholars that we have today. Starting on my far left, we have Sister Nicole Correri, Sister Nazmina Virjee, Sister Amina Inloes, and Hajj Rajabali. And with their permission, I'd like to omit full biography, but please do refer to the booklets for more information. But I'll ask maybe a one-line when you introduce yourselves, a bit about where you're at and what you're doing would be great. So getting to the topic, the nurtured family. So I think it's important to just keep in mind today that there's no cookie cutter solution, right? So we all might be coming from Muslim families, but I think each family is very different. And each family will require different kinds of techniques and different kinds of solutions depending on the structure. But what we hope to do today kind of is to dialogue a bit on some of the tools and techniques that we can use that might be helpful. It seems like families get in trouble and parents get in trouble when they're parenting from a place of anxiety. So hopefully we can dispel a bit of that anxiety today with the tools and techniques that we're going to offer. But ultimately the goal, inshallah, is to be able to create human beings that are good and that contribute good to the world on their own without their parents telling them to do that. So how can we instill values in our kids where they're making those decisions for themselves? And just to acknowledge my debts today, the questions I'll be asking were inspired by a conversation I had with a friend of mine who's a marriage and family therapist, Sister Nadia Bazzi. I don't have any professional expertise in this, nor any personal experience. I haven't raised kids, but I think a lot of us out there are probably in the same boat. So hopefully you can leave today with a toolkit and have some takeaways to think about as you plan your future. And maybe you're approaching this from the receiving end as a child or as a son or a daughter, and you might be facing some challenges with your parents. So we'd really love to hear from all of you, and we have a mic in the middle. Do we? On the sides. So please line up behind the mics at the end. We'll have some time at the end to take your questions, and we'd like to hear from you. As moderator, I'd like to kindly ask our speakers for permission to do that, namely to just try and keep us on time and on topic so that we have time to hear from all of you at the end. I do have a timer going. I'll ask that speakers keep your responses to 3 minutes. And I have cards here, red and yellow, and they operate kind of like the traffic light, right? So if you see yellow, speed up. That's what I do when I drive before you get red. So just pay attention to that, please. Okay, so I think I'm going to go ahead and get started with the first question. Sister Nicole, if you don't mind if we start with you. How do you think is the best way to instill moral conscience in a child, where he or she is motivated independently on their own to be good? So what would that look like? What would it look like to instill values in a non-controlling way?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum salam.
I feel like I'm on a game show, and I've got to give you the right answer in 30 seconds or less. So I'm getting a little nervous now. Astaghfirullah. My background is in psychology and education. That's where I come from as an Islamic speaker. My goal is always to connect people to the religion in a meaningful way. So we try to extract the best we can so we can apply it to our lives practically. So I am a homeschooler. as a profession, everybody asks me, what do you do? I said, well, I homeschool my children, I take care of my family, and on occasion I have the opportunity to speak at events such as this. So that's what I do. I'm an educator in every realm, as well as doing all the dirty work of taking care of the family, right? All the specifics to fill up the day. Now, the most important thing to understand when we're talking about moral development of the human being is that moralizing never will produce a moral human being. And by that I mean giving rules and regulations and as you lay them on top of a human being will not penetrate the heart of the human being. So what do you do then instead? One, and the most significant aspect, and I'm looking at the crowd and I see many, many young faces, so I see that we're talking about your potential future. I do see some older faces as well. People have families perhaps, children, perhaps even some grandchildren. So the most significant thing that I would say you need to think about in terms of developing the moral character of your child or grandchild, as the case may be, is being a role model worthy of imitation. A role model worthy of imitation. And so that means you have to do your own self-development constantly. I often joke that parenting is the fast track to spiritual development, because in front of you are little sponges and mirrors, and they will reflect your actions, your words, your mannerisms, everything right to you immediately. So you're getting this instant feedback that you wouldn't get in any other circumstance. And that's actually remarkable, because it's really an opportunity for your own spiritual growth. It also makes you very nervous and anxious, because then you also see your failings and shortcomings, and that can be stressful. But take a step back and think about how you can improve perhaps one or two aspects of yourself so that you become that individual who's worthy of imitation. And so that this way, the young child will naturally grow towards that direction that is healthy, moral, upright, ethical, and so forth, as well as providing a nurturing and warm environment. We have this topic today called the nurtured family. And what would you say, what temperature would you say goes with nurturing? Temperature. Let me hear it again. Warm. Yes. So creating a warm family environment, a warm, loving relationship with the members of your family, particularly with your child, is the key to developing that healthy environment for them to grow up in. When I say moralizing won't create a moral human being, the idea there is that, like posting information on a wall, for example, a list of do's and don'ts. We have it in the beginning of our brochure here. It tells you what the guidelines are for the conference. How many of you went through that? Reminding people to behave well in this hotel, make sure your children are not running, and so on and so forth. So I'm speeding up now. So the most important thing to keep in mind is that you are the one who sets that guideline, and you are the one who creates that atmosphere. I sped up.
You still have 20 seconds till you pass the red light, but
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Hajj Hassanain, what would it look like to instill values in a non-controlling way?
You're asking the same question again?
Yes, if you'd like to elaborate.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. As Sister Nicole mentioned, I think the most important thing is being good role models. If you look at the entire prescription of Islam, you'll see fundamentally from a social perspective, the holy prophets and the imams are the guiding light for mankind. Nurun ala nur, yahdillahu li nurihi man yasha. Light upon light, and He guides to the light whoever He wills. And Allah said, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. The Holy Prophet is your best role model. So that's the Prophet to the society. And we have to emulate the same pattern for our families, that the parents are prophetic to the children. And if we do not emulate the Holy Prophets, particularly the last Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam as our role model, salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Then obviously we're not fulfilling the objectives. Often the biggest mistake we have is when we have children, and I've seen parents when they have children, they change, they morph into someone else. You know, it's a very interesting metamorphosis, as one would call it, when a child is born to the, before the child is born. where I know when my daughter was born, it struck me that I'm a father. And every time she'd run around, it was almost like a reflection of you. And Allah says, here's a chance. Every mistake you made that you wish you didn't, you can teach that in this child. This is a new life. I'm giving you a new start. Every child that comes into our home, it's a new start for us. We always ask Allah, if only we could go back in time and change what we did wrong. Well, Allah says, every child I give you is a new start. What are you going to do with this one? And some of them are spitting images of us, aren't they? So Allah says, look, they look just like you. Just a newer version, version 2.0. You were 1.0, that's 2.0. Right? But we continue to perpetuate the same mistakes. And they say the fruit doesn't fall far from the tree. It's amazing how we continue to maintain our old ways. And as much as we're regretful, our children typically follow the parents. And what happens, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, your prophet is your role model, you better obey him. قُلْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهَ فَاتَّبِعُونِي. Obey him. So imagine when you and I become good role models, and here the change that I'm talking about, and when I say when we become good role models, our children will naturally gravitate towards us. As they say, the fruit doesn't fall far from the tree. If we fix our own tree, the fruits that we bear will be very good. So in principle here, we as parents many times send mixed messages to our children. I've seen parents drop their kids off at the Islamic Center. It's interesting, you'll see the mom come by the Islamic Center, she'll put on the hijab. As soon as she makes that turn, she throws the hijab off. The child knows that. Or the mom says, okay, go in to learn Quran. The child says, Mom, how about you? She says, no, I'm over the hill. And the child says, oh, so it's not that important because I have to learn it, but you don't. See, that disconnection never leads to positive results. Parents who indulge themselves in the study and they truly believe in the importance of that subject, children don't need to be convinced about the importance of that subject. They see mom and dad involved in it. When mom and dad are Quranic reciters, when I was in Iran, I met, Sayyid Mahmud Hussain Tabatabai. At the age of 6, when I met him, he was 7, he was Hafiz of Quran. His brother was Hafiz of Quran. His sister was becoming Hafiz of Quran. Okay, how did they become Hafiz of Quran? The mom and dad are constantly reading Quran. So the children are naturally reading Quran. So role modelship is extremely important. We should not have double standards. And we need, when our children are born, we fall in love with them and they become our goals. The mistake is, that's the mistake by the way, they should be a means to our goal. See? إِنَّمَا أَمْوَالُكُمْ وَأَوْلَادُكُمْ فِتْنَةٌ. Your family and your wealth are a trial on you. They're a means. You and I have to take our children and say, oh Allah, this amana you gave me, how can I bring him or her closer to you?
Thank you, Hajj Hassanain. Sister Nazmina, just to wrap this topic up, what do you think it means to raise children who are principled and not simply just rule followers, right? So I think there's a tendency to kind of just convey what the laws are and put your foot down and be very rule-based, right? What would it mean to raise kids who are principled?
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Well, I'm not going to repeat what they've so succinctly said about role modeling and modeling the behavior that ultimately you want to see in your progeny. But one particular thing which I feel works for myself in my own household is from young, to instilling these principles and these moral values, for the reward for them to be the value itself. So to draw their attention to the fact, for example, that telling the truth is good because it feels good to tell the truth, not because you're going to get a reward for it or because you're going to be punished if you don't. Sharing, you're encouraged to share because sharing feels good. It feels good, it goes with your fitrah, So from young to draw their attention that being good feels good, and that they're drawn to it naturally rather than, having some kind of maslahah, some kind of end to why they should be good. There should never be an explanation as to why you should be good or why you should, refrain from doing something, but because it feels good to you. So I think that's something that I can say from personal experience. And I hope it will lead for my children to be principled, inshallah. They're still young. But from these are things that you have to instill from when they're young. And it's only when they see you, again, modeling that behavior, when they see you kind of, even sometimes you've got to voice those moral dilemmas that you may be in. Like, I've got this choice in front of me and I've got this choice. I think I'm going to go with this because this is the right way to be. And it's only when they see you voice these things and model what you yourself are doing that they learn how to be. And they learn situationally what to do. Obviously, they're not actually computing what you're doing, but you're modeling that behavior. And I guess I have to touch a little bit on modeling the behavior since it's here and it's a hot topic. You see that in the Quran. Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam, I love the fact that, he's almost got this, I wouldn't say an obsession, but he's so concerned about his progeny. He's so concerned about his dhurriya. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives him this certificate of imama, he says, Inni ja'iluka linnasi imama. The first thing he says is, وَمِن ذُرِّيَّتِي. He's concerned about his dhurriya. And then even when he's going to build the Kaaba, he takes Prophet Ismail along with him. He's there with him doing it. His dua is رَبَّنَا تَقَبَّلْ مِنَّا, from both of us. وَجْعَلْنَا مُسْلِمَيْنِ لَكَ. Make us both Muslims. So he includes him in whatever he can do. He brings him along, And there's that sense, even in his wasiyah, and Prophet Yaqub, they're so concerned about the faith of their dhurriya. So you see that modeled by the prophets themselves, that their progeny, the faith of their progeny was something extremely important, and they did it by having them along with them in everything that they did. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much. Sister Amina, what would you say is kind of the happy medium between thinking too much about what your kids are up to and thinking too little about your kids? So on the one hand, you don't want to be too overbearing, right? Which could be quite suffocating for the child. But then again, no guidance whatsoever is problematic. So how do we strike that balance?
Of course, both scenarios do happen, and both are not ideal for the child. I'm sure we've all seen families where, it's almost as if the child, I don't want to come out the wrong way, but they feel like they're going to have OCD because every detail is controlled, and that doesn't help a person to develop their own independence and to learn how to think and act for themselves. But on the other hand, neglect obviously is very dangerous too, and ideally the family can help young people to basically to learn how to make good decisions, because in the end we'll all be on our own in life with that. Personally, I think the main factor is how important the situation is. That is to say, for example, how dangerous the situation is. There are some things that a child or young person might get into which maybe aren't ideal, but they're not actually a physical danger or an ethical danger. So that's one area that you might give them some leeway. But if something is genuinely threatening to them, either physically threatening to their well-being, or even psychologically, emotionally, religiously, and so forth, then I think those things are very important to look at. One of the things we do have to deal with nowadays is the internet, which is a tremendous blessing. I'm not going to sit here and talk badly about the internet, because we can use it for all sorts of wonderful things. I'm sure many of us found out about this conference online. So it does help all of us, regardless of our age, to keep up with current affairs and learn a lot, keep in touch, etc. But of course, we also know there is another side to this, and internet safety should not be neglected. There are people who will unfortunately prey on young people. And also the illicit material that's very readily available online, in addition to being haram, of course, it is also shown to be very psychologically and personally destructive. And I saw an article recently saying it's also destructive to one's marriage, even if one is viewing it before marriage. It has a long-term effect on one's life. And so these are perhaps sensitive issues, but they're issues that they're not going to go away if we don't talk about them. And so these sorts of things, it is good to be more cautious about, because it's an issue either of personal safety or of something that's going to have a long-term impact. Another thing that's good is to be willing to take feedback or advice from others in the community who work with your children. Teachers, for example, coaches, people in the community, the religious community. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily right. They may not be right in what they see in your children or teenagers, but they may also have another perspective, and it doesn't hurt at least to have the humility and to try to consider it. One thing, and I am speaking specifically to our community now, that I do think some sections of our community have an issue with. I'm not going to say everyone, but sometimes, and I'm speaking from my experience as a former teacher, there are some families in our community who are reticent to consider the possibility that their child might have a learning disability or a health problem or something that's holding them back in life. And so the idea is, well, no, we're just going to treat them like everyone else and it will go away. But that doesn't do the child any favors. It's just going to make their life harder for them. And these things nowadays, alhamdulillah, particularly in this country, there's a lot of educational methods that can be used to help children who have learning disabilities, for example. Healthcare, of course, is quite good. So these things can be dealt with in a way that's actually going to help the child if it's addressed and dealt with in a professional manner. And so it is for the best interest of children or teenagers or even adults not just to ignore these things, but just to deal with them. This is how we are. Allah makes us all different. And I think it's good to have a little bit more awareness about this, albeit that is veering slightly off topic.
No, this is good, actually. Bringing up internet usage, I think that raises a larger question of what do you think exactly is a good way to, what are trust-building practices, basically, that parents can take up with their kids? And so specifically when it comes to monitoring internet, how do you do that in a way where it doesn't kind of undermine building trust with your child?
I think this depends a lot on age. For children, and I mean that literally, people who are not adolescents yet, I would say using technology to filter the internet is a good first step. Now, many children nowadays, I mean preteens, are able to actually circumvent this. I know a family in London. They had some really sophisticated internet filter, and they're telling me how they have this so their teenagers can't access stuff on the internet. And so I went over to their house, and then their son was talking to me, and he said, yeah, and this is what we unplug if we need to use anything on the internet. So, it doesn't always work, but it's a good first step. I personally am not a believer in just allowing every kind of media into the home. I think it is good to restrict television, to restrict internet, to restrict YouTube, because children especially do not have the mental skills necessary to critically analyze these materials. And now if you're sitting with them and talking with them about it, it is a different story. But if they're just getting fed this sort of material, then they're getting fed all sorts of things, and they're not generally old enough to understand what the messages are that they're picking up. Even as adults, I think we should be cautious of what media we expose ourselves to. As for teenagers, or even beyond that age, of course, it's a bit more difficult. The reality is most young people who want to do something will do it and keep it secret and are able to do that. So at some point, the focus has to shift from control over to dialogue and discussion. And like the other sisters were speaking about, and Brother Hassanain, simply trying to have a good line of communication and also trying to raise young people who are able to make good ethical decisions, who also have helped internalize this critical thinking process about life. If I can reiterate the point, just simply giving people guidelines is not always enough for them to actually figure out how to implement it. A very common case in point for all ages. Who here has not heard a religious lecture about gossiping? Right? Anyone never heard a lecture about why gossiping is haram? Right. Who here has never heard anyone gossip? You know, sometimes it's even going on during the lecture. So there is a disconnect between hearing, do this, do that, and someone actually figuring out how to implement it. And so actually taking the time to have discussions about ethical and moral issues or ethical dilemmas, situations, contemporary situations, and so forth, can help develop these skills. And I could emphasize that this doesn't necessarily have to be an abstract. I mean, there's all sorts of things that are going on around us in the society today, and taking an active interest in what is going on, and one can say critically analyzing what is going on. If nothing else, it's a good way to model these things for young people.
Thank you. Speaking about keeping the lines of communication open, Hajj Hassanain, in what ways can we make the voices of children be heard? So how do we make it more of a dialogue and not simply a monologue coming from the parents to the kids?
Well, you know, the basic principles to communicate with our children is to give them the opportunity to express themselves. Often we as parents don't allow our children to speak their minds, or when they do speak their minds, we don't listen to them. And you know, I believe listening is different from hearing. And when we do listen, one way of conformity is to paraphrase what they had just said. And it's a very powerful tool that when a child is mumbling and talking, and he says, oh, so what you meant was this. That conformity, even in a succinct manner, is confirmation that I've heard you and you should keep talking. I'm listening. They've done studies to find that administrators in corporate America, the most effective ones are the ones who are able to paraphrase. You know, even in customer service, if you ever want to win a customer, if you want to win a customer's confidence in you, paraphrase what they just said. Oh, I see. So what you mean is, that conformity is enormous. What it does is it opens channels of communication that the person says, oh, you are paying attention to what I'm saying. So I have to tell you more. If we don't open lines of communication with our children, if we do not befriend them, typically the ones that they trust are their friends. And their friends usually don't give them the right guidance. They have good intentions many a times, but friends are not good guidance. You want to manage the ultimate decision of the child, and the child should know that. But the way we open those channels is from childhood to enable them to be your friends, your sounding board. So many youth that I travel around the world call me and they say, brother, I want to talk to you. And then they'll just spill their hearts out to me. And I'll say to them, you know, I'm your shoulder. Tell me whatever you want. Sometimes I'm on the phone for an hour. Somebody's telling me all their problems. You know, and I do paraphrase a lot in between it, but I'm wondering, why is this person calling me? Now, many times, of course, they don't have family members, or sometimes their family members are broken. But imagine if you had a mother and a father who are your sounding board. It's the safest environment, because now your problems get filtered from the nucleus. It's the safest mechanism possible. So many a times I find parents don't communicate well with their children, particularly men. With due respect, fathers are usually very mechanical in bringing children, thinking that I have this patriarchal, you know, position and I don't talk. Mothers tend to be much more compassionate with their children. They tend to be more chattery with their kids. I think that's just the nature of women, I would say. Which is a good thing.
We'll have a debate on that when we do gender dialogue later.
No,
because we know that you love to talk, Brother Hassanain.
That was. I'm an exception to the rule. And thank God. Imagine if all of us were talking. No, but I'm saying women. Like I know I'm very close to my mother. And sometimes 3-4 hours we're just talking. And sometimes I don't want to hear anything, but my mother talks to me, and it just absorbs. Even though there are times when I feel very spiritually low, but I can't tell my mother I'm spiritually low. It's, it's insulting. But she will tell me, she'll advise me, she'll mention a hadith or she'll recite an ayah, and it just strikes me like, oh, what's wrong with me? I won't say anything to my mother. I'll go back to my room and I'll feel like, wow, you just suddenly got this jolt of energy for deen, It's fantastic. So open up channels of communication. Fathers typically don't talk well with their children, especially their sons. Daughters, they tend to be very friendly. Sons, father to sons, a major problem. Take a lesson in Quran. Luqman is talking to his son, Ya Bunayya, La tushrik billah, Ya Bunayya, aqim as-salah, wa'amur bil ma'ruf, wanha 'anil munkar. What a beautiful set of advices that Luqman gives to his son. It's a template of how fathers should be talking to their sons. When you do that, you eliminate majority of the problems in the child. Children develop their confidence through that communication. When fathers pay attention to them, 90% of their confidence is tackled. Children who suffer from inferiority complex, if you study them, you'll find usually their fathers haven't played a strong role in the family. And they've done studies where fathers, if they don't play a strong communication role with their children, they will weaken the family structure. Extremely important. I can talk a lot about that, but I think let's just continue with the dialogue.
Sure, thank you. I'd also like to encourage the speakers to jump in. Feel free to talk to each other. If there's a question that I don't ask you to address and you want to add something, please do feel free to do that.
Can I jump in?
Sure.
This issue of communication, particularly fathers to sons, mothers to sons, mothers to daughters, and so on, is so critical. And we see when someone's retired, especially gentlemen who are now grandfathers, you'll hear them when they look at their grandchildren, I wish I had spent more time with my child. That's the wrong time to reevaluate your parenting. Evaluate it from the beginning. This is very important. And I think if we look at the Hadith Kisa as a model for family connectedness, we have an image there that we should apply in our own lives. What do we see in this Hadith Kisa that we read every time we begin a gathering? And it's read sometimes really rapidly just to get through it. But what do you see? You see an image of a family together, everyone included. Who comes there? Prophet's there. Who comes under the cloak? Fatima comes under the cloak, alayhi salam. Imam Ali, Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein. Isn't that beautiful? It's the image of the family together under one blanket or cloak. It's amazing. And here you're seeing that all of them are together. So that also gives you an image of proximity, meaning being near one another is what a family should be doing. And look at our lifestyle today where houses are getting larger and larger and everyone has their own room and everybody can close their door and everybody can be separate and everybody can plug into their multiple devices. They can watch, now all the cable companies promote these televisions where you can watch multiple channels at the same time and everybody can watch their own thing and record their own show for later and so on. So more and more our society is showing us ways in which we can separate from one another. So my biggest advice would be think about how you can pray together more. Jama'ah Salah as a family. Always priority. And that's something I do with my children because as I homeschool, I have the opportunity to do Salatul Dhuhr and Asr and obviously Maghrib Isha, most people do, but I do all of the salahs with them. And I make sure that we're doing it together. So this is like a priority. And always you hear the advice in parenting magazines, on parenting shows that families should eat together, right? You should share a meal together. And this is where those opportunities for dialogue can happen because it's casual, it's more relaxed, nobody's on the spot, right? And so then you can talk. Another technique for talking and being together is driving, particularly with teenagers, because they're captive audience. Now they're next to you, you're driving. This is a great place to dialogue. In fact, I really look forward to the times I drive my daughters different places. If they have an activity or a program, I love having them in the car independently. And then we really can talk and we can really get to know things. And then they sometimes say the most brilliant things and you think, Alhamdulillah, it's so amazing to see how their minds are working, how they're excited about life. And talking about that little element right there, being excited about life is the also key and critical thing that young people need in this alienating world we live in. The most important thing you want to provide your children is that interest and excitement in life. We don't need to indoctrinate our children on all kinds of Sharia, because then we're not using the prophetic model. What is the prophetic model? The Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Moms, sisters. There we go. This model begins by instilling the love of something greater than all of us. That there is this oneness, this God that is looking out for all creation, that is looking out for all humanity, that is guiding and directing us, and that ultimately we return to, that will judge things and take care of us and set everything straight, right? And put us at ease. So this whole image of connecting with something greater than you is absolutely vital to the well-being of the human being. Spiritually, mentally, physically, emotionally, to know that there is something greater than you, and to connect yourself with that, and to lose yourself in a way in that greater existence.
You know, speaking about eating, you say when we get together we should eat together. Charlie Rose was interviewing Larijani. As you know, Larijani is the Speaker of the Parliament of the Islamic Republic. And he asked him, he says, you, your brother, your family, almost all of you are in politics. How did you all get there? And how come you're all in such high positions? He said, we always ate together, and our father always spoke on the table with us and gave each one of us time to express what we felt, and we spoke politics. It became the norm of our lives. So imagine if Allah is in that conversation, right? Your spirituality is in there, the business is in there, the politics is in there. What do you think your children will be like?
Mm-hmm. You set the tone, essentially.
Yeah. You set the tone, and I think it's important that it's not just the parents speaking, but that we evoke answers from the children themselves. I think one of the techniques is paraphrasing, and another one is the technique of questioning. Not questioning as in interrogating or grilling, nothing like that, but to actually ask their opinion. And they come out with such surprising things sometimes. An opinion on what I should do, for example. What do you think I should do in this situation? And again, I keep going back to the example of Prophet Ibrahim. He does the same thing. He has a dream. He knows what he's supposed to do. He says, "Inni adbahuka fil manam, fanzur madha tara." What do you think about it, my son? He knows what he's supposed to do, but yet, so he actually asks, what do you think? And I think that's a really powerful technique with children, because they feel valued, number one, that you're asking them their opinion, that there's somebody listening to what they have to say. You're not just talking at them all the time, or telling them what to do, or expressing how you know about everything and your way is good and, preaching, but you're actually interested to hear on their views of the world, their opinion on things, the way they might do things differently, So I think that's something also very, very powerful and conducive to dialogue, where you use that tool and technique of questioning.
Just a quick point about questioning. Just recently at Wise, one of the boys had an altercation with another boy because one was annoying the other. And this really, really works. And I think this is the problem, many of us, in our fad society where Hollywood and Bollywood feeds us this fad, and we are sort of in paralysis, receiving the crumbs from these masters who are creating imaginations for us. We're designed not to ask questions. Okay, we are in a very passive mode. We're supposed to receive instructions, and we become what we call the matrix. And what I find is the Quran is filled with questions. أَفَلَا يُؤْمِنُونَ أَلَيْسَ اللَّهُ بِأَحْكَمِ الْحَاكِمِينَ. I always wonder, why is Allah asking me the question when He's talking to me? As the sister is mentioning, the power of questioning. So when this boy got into an altercation with this other boy, I asked him, I said, so what did you do? He says, well, I just jumped on him and I was going to punch him. I said, well, is that the right thing to do? And I'm asking him questions. He says, well, no. I said, well, what should you have done? He says, well, he annoyed me. I said, I know. Well, what do you think you should have done? He says, well, I don't know. In the state of annoyance, I don't know. I said, well, how about if you looked at him and said, hey, why are you annoying me? He said, huh? I said, why don't you ask him why he's annoying you? Maybe he'll tell you. He says, he won't answer me. I said, it's irrelevant what he answers you. The point is, you've engaged the individual to think. Most of us have gone astray because we don't ask why. Simple. Why am I here? what am I doing here? When I come on this pulpit and speak on these tables, I'm asking, why am I here? Am I here to entertain you? Am I here to impress you? Am I here to fulfill an objective? When we ask such questions, we become more focal and focused to fulfill the objectives. So ask each other, why? Even when someone's getting angry, excuse me, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? Huh? Yeah, that's all. Walk away. He doesn't have to answer you. He said, oh, he asked me why. I wonder. I said, you know, if you go and ask him, then the boy came and says, you know the reason I bother him? I asked him, so why'd you bother him? He says, I want his attention, I like him. I want him to be my friend. I said, you're doing it the wrong way.
You know, just to add a point, which is really important, when you're looking at the developmental appropriateness of when you begin to question and ask and elicit opinions from young people, there's actually a good time to do that, and there's a premature time to do that. And when we look at how children develop, what they need very much in the early years of life is that what we call in the system that I teach in, called Waldorf education, loving authority. All right, some of you might have heard me speak about this before. Loving authority means, again, back to that idea of being a worthy role model, that you have that confidence, that you have that image of what it is to be a human being, and the child looks up to you, right? When you ask too many questions of a young child who has not yet developed what Sister Amina was referring to before, that critical thinking skills, you're actually stressing them. Because you're inadvertently, right, telling them that you don't know. And that makes them anxious. So I've told this story before, but I think it's worthy of, because it gives you a good picture of why this is important. For the young child, and I'm speaking up to the age of 7, if you begin to ask them, what would you like to do? Where would you like to go? What would you like to eat? You get them very anxious. Because guess what, Mom and Dad? You're supposed to know that.
How did you come up with the age of 7?
These are 7-year cycles of human development that Steiner talks about, but it also reflects the hadith of the Holy Prophet where he breaks down childhood in 7-year cycles.
But Steiner came up with the hadith?
Yeah,
I mean,
Steiner uses that model. He didn't come up with the hadith.
I'm saying, was he privy to the hadith?
No, I don't think so.
So it would be interesting to find out, I mean, what research has shown that 7, because, you know, it's conforming in the sense historically.
Biologically, too.
Yeah.
There's a certain brain develop that happens at age 7.
Yeah.
And then 14 as well. When at 14 and 15, the brain convolutes a second time, and there's more critical thinking skills. So those are part of those cycles. And those cycles continue throughout life, which is fascinating. So whenever I meet people who are going through trouble, they'll talk to me about what's going on. I'll say, how old are you? And inevitably, they're on that 7-year cycle, at that cusp, 35, 42, and so forth. There's usually critical changes in the development of the human being. So in this picture of the story, I want to tell you, the little child was at the cash register. How many of you have been at the cash register? What do they always put out there? Lots of tempting things, yes? The child sees all these cookies. The mom starts telling the child, which one do you like? Would you like this one? There are about 6 different flavors. How about the oatmeal raisin? Do you want chocolate chip? Maybe, we'll get this, sugar cookie. And on. The mom's going. And then she starts saying, maybe we should get this one for your friend. She would like this. And she's going on and on. About 2-3 minutes into this, the young child busts out into tears. She was about 6 years old. She's like, I don't know. You pick it, Mom. So this is just an image of what takes place when the young child is burdened too early with too many choices. You're not going to inhibit their self-esteem or their development by giving that firm boundary and grounding. That doesn't mean you're authoritarian, where you insist on everything harshly. No, but at the same time, you're not permissive. It has to be the middle way, just like our religion talks about the middle way. We want to have that balance. But that security that you give them by creating healthy boundaries, clear expectations, and not by talking too much necessarily either, because a young child can't handle all that verbosity. That's really healthy. And as they grow, you begin to engage them as we've discussed here. And you take, especially in the teenage years, that opinion, just like that's beautiful that you're pointing out Ibrahim alayhi salam, having this dialogue and reminding us that that's what Allah says should take place.
Quran
it's
has
beautiful.
it all. It's just unbelievable.
It's amazing.
Yeah, and another good point to keep in mind is that it takes a long time for most human beings to really understand, for us to understand why we do what we do. And especially children don't usually have this capacity unless they're very abnormally introspective, or unusually, not abnormally, but unusually. Teenagers, probably not. Even in our 20s, sometimes it's not there. Inshallah, it develops. But a lot of times this comes up when we're dealing with negative behaviors, because if it's positive behaviors, we don't really care. So, for example, if they love math and they do math problems all day, we don't ask why. But if they're not doing their homework, or maybe they're dressing in a way that we don't like, maybe they're wearing something, or they want something that we might feel is too expensive, or why do you want that? Whatever it is that they're doing, a lot of times there's this tendency just to treat the behavior or to punish for the behavior. So just punish for the grades, or punish for the homework, without actually getting to the root causes. And like Hajj Hassanain was saying, sometimes the root causes are very different from what we could imagine. That young person obviously has not yet learned the skill of making friends. This is a skill. It's not something children are born with. They're going to try different ways to figure out how to make friends. It's a modeled skill that one, inshallah, can learn from one's family or school and so forth. But the point is, as we are growing up, we don't have all of these things sorted out. So it could be something like that, or even with homework. I mean, it could be something as simple as the child doesn't know how to study, or they don't know how to organize their notes, or write reminders to bring things to school. I mean, they maybe need support with that. It may be an emotional issue, for example, that's pushing them just to be in denial and watch TV all day, or it may be peer pressure, why they want this or that, or there may be serious things going on. But the point being that one of the things we can do once we reach a certain stage in life is try to get a bit more into the why. And that can come through dialogue. I mean, sometimes even very young people are very astute, but sometimes it takes a bit of digging. Especially when we're dealing with very young children, I think also there's a tendency sometimes we look at them as mini adults. And while I firmly believe in that we should in many ways treat our young people in an adult manner, that is to say, we should always be pushing them to aspire to adulthood instead of keeping them young, which I think sometimes does happen in our community. On the other hand, we have to remember that developmentally they are not adults. So if a 5-year-old, for example, steals your credit card, an adult reaction is to get mad and, what's he going to do with this, or she going to do with it? We have to remember, it's a 5-year-old. They don't have any concept of this sort of thing. So wait a minute, what is going on? What has prompted this behavior? Are they trying to imitate an adult, or do they know it's important to you and they want to annoy you, or they're not having enough attention? Yeah, and attention is a good thing to conclude on. And this is actually another thing that one picks up when working in a classroom. But I often say everything I needed to know I learned in high school. And that is, we all need attention, whether we're adults, whether we're teenagers or children. And one of the best pieces of advice I received as a teacher was when you have a child in the class who's misbehaving because they want attention, just give them attention. Now, don't necessarily give them attention to reward them for the behavior, but make sure they're getting the attention that they need, and then a lot of the undesirable behaviors will subsist. So you're meeting the actual need instead of dealing with the symptom.
So you say that we tend to focus on the negative characters. So if a child does something wrong in school, we tend to say, okay, why are you failing this class? But we ignore the good class. So you would suggest that we should recognize the good work to sort of counterbalance?
Well, that's a very important point. Yes, it is proven. I would say it's been proven psychologically that positive reinforcement is much more effective with people. And again, this is not age limited. It works with employees, it works with children, it works with spouses. Positive reinforcement leads to lasting change in people, and it brings us up, giving people to aspire to something. But it's more difficult. It takes more thought. It's much easier to punish. I was talking about this with someone the other day, but because he's not here, I can talk about this. I had a very difficult boss once. So this is an adult situation, but the same principle applies. So me and my coworkers were trying to think about what can we do to deal with this situation, because it was really making our lives very difficult. It was very negative, always criticizing people, getting very upset. So we decided we were going to have a secret plan to be very, very positive and to say lots of nice things about him behind his back. So we didn't actually say it to him, but we started praising him all the time to other people. And somehow either he heard about it or it created some vibe. And And I mean, although this is someone who's significantly older than myself, but still, we're like this at any age. He saw an example that he wanted to aspire to. He wanted to be this efficient, nice, compassionate, kind person, and he really changed. And the whole environment of things changed. And of course, that's an example in the workplace, but it's the same whether dealing with young children or adults. We don't want to be bad. We don't want people to tell us we're bad. We want to be good. The human being has a desire for perfection. So the higher we can give people good standards to fulfill, the more likely they are to fulfill them. Thank you for bringing up that very important point.
I'd like to go ahead and open the floor up to the audience for questions. And just a gentle reminder to please keep your questions short and to the point. It's not a personal counseling session. Sister Nicole has, however, offered up her time if you'd like to speak to her after, and I'm sure the other speakers are happy to talk to you as well.
I need counseling on how to stop talking.
I can find effective therapy for you. Inshallah, we'll talk later.
Speaking about counseling, maybe the speakers can address this depending on the questions. How do we decide when we need spiritual advice and when we need professional advice in a situation? So we don't need to send everyone to the imam, right? Sometimes we do actually need professional advice. Maybe we can touch on that at some point. The brother on the right, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.
Thank you for an excellent presentation. Providing the influencing factors of the formation of a human being from a young age. Come forward. Okay, that's better, I think. But I think you haven't still touched on the single biggest factor, influencing factor on a child, at least according to the result of a significant research that I had the opportunity to read its abstracts a little more than a decade ago, and I need to look it up again. And that is actually the relationship between the father and the mother. Mm-hmm. And that's a lot more subtle and more difficult to discuss. I was wondering if anyone wants to comment on that. The mother is very important, the father is very important, teachers are important.
You're saying father and mother relative to the child?
The relationship of the parents to one another, as according to this research they found, was the most significant influencing factor in the life of a child as the child is growing up. If you care to comment on that. And this admittedly is more difficult, much more subtle.
That's an excellent point, and it is definitely something in the literature. The health of the relationship between husband and wife, again, sets the tone of the family environment. And if you notice, as you listen to all the comments we've been making, our advice has one theme, a very, very prominent theme. We've all touched on it. And that is, we're telling each of you, and reminding ourselves as well, that in order to solve or address any of these issues, we always have to take a step back and assess the situation. So in other words, we're saying the best advice is to learn how to overcome reactions, innate tendencies, things that we've learned from our family, like we just are copying something we've seen, or we notice, and this is what many people see as they grow up, I sound like my mother, I sound like my father, and we don't have this intention to do that. But nonetheless, we're talking about how to address any of these issues, to develop emotionally, to develop spiritually, to develop psychologically, you have to learn how to have more self-control. So there's actually many studies on this topic as well, that the capacity for self-control is the single most factor determining a human being's healthy adult development. And we are the religion of self-control, because every aspect of our ibadah reflects this. We have to stop life to pray. We have to stop, eating for an entire month. What's self-control? We have all this advice on how to control the tongue and control the emotions and so on. So we have the best opportunity of any religion, really, to develop these capacities. But it requires really diligent work with yourself. And likewise, with the relationship between husband and wife, you're setting, again, the emotional tone, the warmth, the coldness, or the violence in some cases, or the, whatever scenario. You're setting that tone, and the children are absorbing it. And that's what we have to remember, that children are like sponges. They absorb everything, especially at the very young age. And they're doing this all unconsciously, pre-verbally, right? Because they're not rational yet. So they're soaking all of that in. So the key issue is, how can you always work on, one, your own self-development, and how can you as a husband and wife become a team? Because the children will watch those variations between you, and they'll learn who to go to. You've talked about this many times. Mom says yes, dad says no, they'll know who to go to. So we have to make sure we're on the same team, that we have the same vision, that we have the same mission, and that we can learn to negotiate.
And don't
that
argue,
requires self-control.
And don't argue in front of the children.
Yeah, definitely no arguing.
Make it a pact.
And
Couples
violence,
should never
yeah.
argue in front of the children.
Absolutely. It's an agreement that you have to come to, but we haven't touched on it, but domestic violence and abuse are traumatic experiences that will have lifelong impact on that child's well-being. And that is a reality that many people deal with. So it's a topic we should take, inshallah, in more depth in the future, but that's such an important issue.
Thank you for asking, brother.
The sister, please go ahead.
So my question is about when is it like our role has been completed? I'm not a parent, so I'm not 100% sure if there's an answer to this, but we talk a lot about ideals and let's be role models, and these are these are the examples we should adhere to. But what about the example Prophet Noah, who he wasn't able to convince his son to get on the boat with him. So at what point have we done our mission as parents?
Forever. You never stop. The role of parents.
How old he was.
The role of parents never stops at any age. I even asked Ayatollah Jawadi when I was in Iran the question of الرجال قوامون على النساء. The man is authority over the woman. And I said, what do you mean by this? He said, this is only in marital relations where the husband has to be the provider for the wife. That's the command. He said, look, I have a mother, I'm an old man. Even if there's jihad for me to go to fight for Allah, if my mother does not allow me, I cannot go. So here's the example, a very extreme example, where you have an old man, right? He's quite aged, but his mother is alive, and he wants to go and fight for the cause of Allah. But she doesn't want him to go, you see. He says, then I must not go. Because he says, my mother remains my authority up to my death. It never stops. So motherhood, fatherhood, in the Quran, وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَنْ لَا تَعْبُدُ إِلَّا إِيَّا وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. This is eternal. I mean, in the sense, in the worldly matters.
And can I just add that Prophet Nuh's son was a grown-up man, and it wasn't something that happened, kind of overnight, that, he, when the ark was ready and everything, then he refused to board. It doesn't happen overnight. So we know that Prophet Nuh had been trying and trying and trying, and that Allah had promised that he would save his ahl. So up until the end, he's saying, "Inna ibni, qala Rabbi inna ibni min ahli." My son is part of my ahl, save him. And it's not until the point where Allah says, "Innahu laysa min ahlik." Allah is the one who cuts him off. So a parent has no right to disown a child, or to say that, to wash his hands off a child, because that remains your responsibility. It's not until Allah's command came that, that innahu laysa min ahlik, then that cutoff happens. Before that, a parent is attached to that responsibility.
And ask the question, you look at Nuh, Lut, right? They had bad children, without making a general relationship, but one of the parents was not good. See, Nuh and Lut's wives, their wives were not good. Quran mentions that. And you look at the flip side, you look at Yazid's wife, Hinda, she was a very pious woman. Muawiyah II was the heir apparent to Yazid, and he absconds his position and gives it up and gets killed by Marwan bin Hakam. So imagine, here's Yazid's son, the most treacherous man besides Fir'aun and these people, right? You have such a wonderful son. Flip it the other way, you have Nuh, who was a great prophet, who is a terrible son. So parental influence is huge, even in the prophetic families.
Thank you.
Brother, please go ahead.
Thank you to the organizer for bringing about this this topic. I think it's very important, and we continue to build on it. I feel like we didn't get enough about the attention part. I have multiple children, and it seems like there's varying amount of attention that they want. Sometimes they want attention from me, but sometimes it seems like they want attention from their other siblings, older siblings. So I guess my question is, how do I teach the older ones to kind of lead or explain to them that, sometimes they're just, the younger ones are just looking for attention from you as well?
In other words, teach your eldest children to become role models for the younger ones.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I think essentially that's what they're looking for.
Good point.
Do you want to talk about it? All right. So
in other words, you have your 3 daughters, right? Mm-hmm. Your eldest one. I mean, she played a big role in helping your other daughters, right?
Definitely. And whether she wants to or not, she is the role model, because the little ones are always looking up. Again, it goes back to that human nature that we talked about earlier, that children are always looking up. And ideally, they should be looking up and not looking at peers necessarily, because peers don't have the answer. They're at the same developmental level, the same mental level. They don't necessarily have the right answer for you in terms of where do you go next, yeah? So the role of siblings is so important, but to nurture that would require, again, building that family atmosphere. What do you do together? What family traditions do you have together? How do you create that? I know I just spotted a friend of mine who came from a big homeschooling family. They've got that strong family ethic, and they are connected because life happened with each other. It was a family-oriented life, meaning when we go somewhere, we go together. When we eat together. We do salah together. We learn together. We get invested in life together. And again, the parents are creating that atmosphere of interest in the religion, connection to the community, and going and striving and maintaining it. But in terms of like the eldest, I actually do outright remind my eldest, you're a role model. Sometimes they don't want to take that responsibility, but I will remind.
But you're refereeing it, though.
Say that again?
As parents, you're refereeing.
Yes, definitely.
I think that's what he's asking.
Yeah, how do you referee? But also, you've got to remind the eldest that this is their responsibility too. They're looking up to you. They need you. And so you should create scenarios where that eldest looks after the youngest. Like a lot of times in the homeschooling environment, I'll allow the older child to, work with the younger one and guide them on something. It's a fantastic opportunity. Or you can, in a regular school environment, you get the older siblings to help the younger ones do whatever, homework assignment. Likewise with chores, the eldest one should teach the younger one how to do something. Whatever scenario you can create, give that older child an opportunity to teach, to lead. So you have to do that consciously. That's the point. It may not happen naturally, especially in our kind of divisive world, but you have to create those opportunities. And it also requires reminding as well. Any other thoughts?
Sister, I think you have a question.
I have a question about...
We can't hear. Could you lift the mic up a bit closer? If you just pick it up, yeah.
So my question is it on or?
Oh, there we go.
My question is where to kind of draw the limit to setting a rule for your child. For example, social media. Like what type of social media can you have? Because they clearly don't know how to control it or how to use it. And so you try to, I feel like you try to talk to them about it, but how do you really convince them? And then where should you kind of put your foot down and say, okay, I can't get him to see what I want him to see or her to see. So then how do I just say, okay, now this is the rule, but then the tricky part is that they can just go behind your back and now you're not even aware of it. And so now you don't even know what they're doing, right? So I guess my question is, how do you talk to them so that either they understand what you're going to say, or you let them do it with limits, or you try to eliminate it altogether. And I guess Sister Nicole, because I know you have older children, so maybe if you want to kind of give me your perspective, or I would appreciate that.
So one of the most important things to realize is that technology and media usage is another mechanism in which we individuate ourselves, or we separate ourselves from something wider and greater. So the cure then would be to do the opposite. And how can you connect your children with community more? How can you connect them with the responsibility of service more? How can you give them more chores as they grow up so that, you know, their time is filled with something real? So that's number one. You're setting limits by doing the opposite of what that device or that thing does. So what we see in media, right, I mean, all these devices, is that it draws you away from social connection. It's just simply the nature of it. In Waldorf education, we do not encourage this type of media until, you know, much later, and we're very restrictive with it for good reason. We want to develop those healthy connections and emotional human relationships before we let these types of influences set in, because they're dominating and they're addictive. They have an addictive nature. And particularly for the young child, it's changing their brain development. It's rewiring the brain in terms of their expectation time-wise. There's even studies done on this in terms of how long it takes for a response from your computer, that people are conditioned now to expect a certain amount of time. And the brain actually changes that little meter, so to speak, of what's too long. And we're all changing. But it's particularly significant for young minds because the brain is still malleable, it's still changing and growing. And so the influences that they're having that are changing the way their reactions are, their attention capacity and so on, is being influenced. So the more you can connect your child with real life, and the more you can keep your relationship open, the better. And that might mean setting very strict rules. That might mean they have to earn their opportunity to use whatever they want to use. It might mean that you get rid of it for an entire month as an experiment and learn how to be a family again. Go out and do real activities. Go hike. Go do community service. Go to the soup kitchen. Go help the mosque clean up. Go prepare for a majlis. Whatever. Whatever you want to do that's healthy and real. And I want to share a small story. There was recently on NPR a program that was discussing the Christmas traditions. And this man who's in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, he has a museum on Christmas. And he says when the children come, and he of course looks like Santa just naturally, the children come and what do they ask him? They ask him what, for toys, electronics, goods? No. They say they want some problem in their family fixed, or they wish that, you know, something was better in their life. They actually ask for human connection. And that's what children really, really want and really, really need. And now when they've become conditioned and they can't control that themselves yet, because remember, they're irrational, they're immature, they're growing, they don't have that self-control yet. You're the self-control. And that means boundaries, and that means earning, and that means setting up opportunities for responsibility. Inshallah.
I think we have time for one last question. Please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. I just had a quick question. You guys mainly spent time talking about the length of attention parents should be given to their children, and you were saying how too little attention can be a problem, but I would say that you neglected to touch upon how too much attention can also be as problematic. So
Sister Amina mentioned that a bit.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that part, my mistake.
Well, we can go into it.
If you can, because I know with regards to being parents, knowing when and where to draw the line can be very critical.
When you say too much attention, you're talking about controlling kind of attention?
That...
In other words, if let's say you're a father, and you're always aware of your son's whereabouts, you don't necessarily micromanage the child, but this child always knows that my father is aware of everything I do. You would call that the extreme kind of attention? The type where your father forgets you once in a while would be a good thing. Yeah, so that's what I'm trying to ask you. Let's say my father loves me very much, but he's distant. He keeps an eye. He sees me doing something, he nods, he says, good job. But he's always present in my soul. He's always present in my spirit. Where even if I'm away, I'm traveling, but I'm thinking of him and he's thinking of me, that's not too much attention, I would assume. Okay, so you're basically asking the negative kind, the controlling kind. Like, I don't want you going out, what are you doing? What are you eating? Where are you going to eat? How are you going to do? Who are you talking to? You know, I want to check all your emails. You're asking that kind of a question. Okay, I just wanted to be, because I think every parent should constantly be thinking of their kids, and the kids should be thinking of their parents, but in a subtle way, where there's this divine presence of recognizing Allah's mercy. It's different from being overly controlling?
I think we all have to give Hajj Hassanain a salawat for so effectively demonstrating the skill and effectiveness of paraphrasing and listening.
Thank you, Amina. Thank you. Actually, I'm trying to understand it myself too much, so I think paraphrasing also helps me understand. Thank you.
And actually, it helped me to understand too. It helped clarify the brother's question a lot.
But please, why don't you try to answer it?
Well, I would add to what you're saying that I think the real issue is not the amount of attention, but whether it's positive or negative attention. So positive attention is going to help a young person grow and flourish, and whether it's growing intellectually, growing in terms of becoming independent, growing socially, and getting the guidance that they need to become more of a person. Smothering attention is something where you're basically just imposing what you want on them, and it may be because of your own needs. So for example, it happens sometimes a parent is insecure in their life, or they feel a sense of loneliness, or they didn't have enough attention from their own family growing up, maybe they lost their family, whatever. So they project that onto the children, and it holds them back. And the difference between that is the parent, I want to just make like side point. There is sort of a assumption in a lot of these discussions that every family has the biological father and mother. If that happens, that's a very good thing, but we all know there's all sorts of situations people are in, and many times through no circumstances of our own, and I just don't want to alienate people in other family situations, especially because as young people you can feel a little bit rotten if everyone's always talking about dad and mom at home. Maybe your mom's passed on, or you have a stepmom, or the whole thing. So I'm using this in general, whatever your family situation is. For example, the positive attention is if your child has a science fair project, that you help them come up with a good topic, you give them some advice about how to research, you might check in with them, how's your deadline going, maybe you could help them draw up a schedule, so you make sure it gets done, but it's a growth process which facilitates them to learn to do it properly. The negative way of attention, which can be the same amount, is, for example, ignoring them completely, that's one thing, but also just simply doing it for the child, like basically you're not capable enough, you're not doing this right, let me do that, this is going to look bad on me, whatever it is, that's not promoting their growth as a person or academically or any other way. So ultimately, I think as adults, one of the challenges we sometimes face in family issues, whether it's marital issues, children issues, stepchildren issues, etc., is recognizing where what we're doing is serving our own needs versus serving the needs of younger people, and their needs in terms of their growth and whatever our responsibility is does need to come first. I mean, we may have needs that also are very important, but in terms of how we interact with them, we have to make sure it is for their own good.
I think here I'd like to add that quality of attention is just as important as quantity. That sometimes you're in a situation where you may have numerous kids and you simply don't have the time to go around between your children, but that 15, 20 minutes, half an hour before bedtime with every child can make the world of difference because they've got undivided attention. And I think that undivided attention and special time with each child is something that you cannot compensate.
That's an excellent point.
Just to be able to,
quality
talk about your
quantity.
day and, what was the best thing about your day? What was the worst thing about your day? What would you change about today? What are you thankful for today? And for, the parent to answer these questions and the child too. I think it's just such a beautiful time in the day, and your child feels replenished. They're listened to, they're, looked after, they're in your arms. And I think that kind of attention is just indispensable when you don't have enough quantity to go around.
Good point. Very good point.
So it looks like I got the green light for the last two questions. We can still hear from you. So is that you, Hajj Khadija? I can't. Yes, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. I wanted to thank you guys the opportunity for having this topic. As a mother of four, I'm always finding it hard to strike a balance between culture and religious values. Growing up in the West, we're always faced with Hallmark holidays that we have to explain to our children, this is not for us, we are Muslims. But also we have family cultural issues that we need to tackle as well. Example, putting on your hijab at an early age, or dating. So as a parent, what are some techniques or things that we need to develop within our own families that can help us approach these cultural versus religious values and how to tackle them as our children are growing older? I mean, just thinking about Valentine's Day in school makes me nervous for my children, you know, but not that it's a bad thing. I went to public school, but at the same time, how do you teach your children from from cultural and religious values?
Do you differentiate though as a parent? Many of us as parents, when we talk about culture versus religious, the Sharia of Islam, for example, the fundamental principles, many a times we don't know the difference as parents. We ourselves don't know. And I think that exercise in itself is cathartic, number one. As a parent, if you struggle to say, what's the difference between culture? What was the sunnah of Rasulullah? Let's find out the mechanism of derivation of law. That what violates something? When does Allah become displeased? You know, like the argile argument, right? Smoking shisha and argile. People say, is it halal, is it haram? I said, look, the basic rule is if it's harmful, it's haram. And nobody on earth can tell you that shisha is not harmful, right? So you don't need to argue there. You can say it's harmful. So now we will try to minimize it by saying, well, it's a little harmful. It's 1% harmful, you know, it's a little poison. It's like, you know, Botox. It's just a little harmful if you drink it, you know. It's like curare, poison. Yeah, but it's good for your skin though. Yeah, but it kills you. So when do you draw the line? So I think as parents, if we proactively work to differentiate the derivation of law and understand the distinction between law and where law stops and culture takes over, then we will become our own fishermen. We don't need people throwing fish at us. Many times parents themselves don't know the difference. So you're talking about, for example, Halloween. I've seen our Muslim communities put these goons outside their homes, and they put all kinds of spider webs. You know, it's makruh to have webs in your home. We actually manufacture, we buy them, we go to this. And I know some people get so annoyed with me when I talk about Halloween. Brother, astaghfirullah, we're going to the neighbors to get candy. I said, which sunnah did the Prophet leave us that when you go to your neighbors to ask for candy? I never heard of this sunnah, number one. You go ask for candy. You should go give candy. Number two, he says, either you give me candy or I'll trick you. Bah, this is beautiful. Trick or treat. All right, either you treat me or I trick you. MashaAllah. Yet we have our Muslim community begging. What's wrong with it? I said, you got 364 days to go give candy to your neighbor. More kids get abused on that day than any day in the year. There's more fire, more, people burn homes more in that time than any time of the year. So if we differentiate these cultures, and when we say to our children, we're not going to celebrate this, give them alternatives. Don't say no. If you know something is bad, offer them something else. Guaranteed they will take something else.
Yeah, because they want your time.
Yeah.
They want to have that connection. I think also, this is an interesting topic, differentiating between culture and religion, because as an American, myself, and a convert to the religion, this has a different tone for me. Because I've already been American, so to speak, and here I'm coming to something else. I think it has to be approached in a balanced way as well. Because if you come down too strictly, that's haram, we push everything aside, and we alienate ourselves from the wider community, which does happen in our communities. We hear stories about this often. That's unhealthy for the children. That's going to create a backlash later on. They're going to want to go after that even more, or they're going to implement that. So you've got to find a happy medium. If you're constantly alienating your child or your family from practices in the wider culture, you're going to create harm. So what can you connect with? What can you relate to? Thanksgiving is a fantastic opportunity. Doing community service during, Christmas time and feeding people, bringing toys to other children. There's ways in which you can connect to these traditions and events that are healthy and Islamic. At the same time, you're not completely alienating your family and making them feel like strangers and making them feel so different from their peers that they just feel awkward and unhappy happy. We don't want to create that kind of environment either.
Look at this conference. It's during Christmas time.
So how
That's an alternative. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
So quickly, how would you deal with the Valentine's Day thing that the sister mentioned?
Valentine's Day. How would I deal with it? Homeschooling.
I knew it.
Thank you so much to our speakers. Hajj Musa, I'm sorry I see you standing there, but I'm going to have to ask you to come after. I got the big red card.
That's a quick, I swear. Go ahead.
All right, 10 seconds.
Well, I was going to be a little longer than that. But, my role is I'm a principal of a high school. And so I get to see a lot of teenage children experience a lot of issues. And so hearing some of the questions, I just wanted to throw out two things. Number one is the investment of time in your kids. And two is the affirmations. If I looked at all the students that come into my office who have issues, psychological issues, emotional issues, drug abuse issues, I think they lack two things: investment of time by their parents and affirmations.
I have one quick story. It takes 10 seconds. We're on a roll of overtime, but this is beautiful and it punctuates this. There was a man who was told, and he was an Australian truck driver, and he used to go across the country constantly. He was told his son had ADHD, attention deficit disorder. So he ended up taking his son out of school for several months and brought him on the road with him. And when he brought him back to the school, their relationship was repaired. He was fantastic. And he went to the school and he told him, I took your advice. You told me he had attention deficit disorder, so I took him with me. He didn't realize that attention deficit disorder was technically a label or a diagnosis. He thought he owed his son more attention. And he did, and he cured him. So, mashallah.
Wow.